Well, hi everyone. Since we're talking about slavery lately, I thought I would comment on a couple of hangouts that I watched last night. In particular, the one where Vecca was in charge. I think it was a Gman hangout, but I think Vecca was using that, so he was sort of moderating it more. And it had Matt Bell, and I think Shannon on there, and Epicurus Greek, and that cast of characters. And I thought it was interesting. There was a lot of finger pointing, and it got quite animated at some points where I think Gman was saying that Epicurus wasn't a real Christian, and then Matt Bell wasn't, and then Matt Bell was making accusations. Here's a pro tip once again for all of you Christians who want to convince atheists that you have the right stuff. If you can kind of come to some sort of a consensus on what the theology is, that'd be great. You may find a little more traction. Hey, probably not, right? But you might find a little bit more traction, or at least a little more consideration on the part of non-believers to your theology if you were all promoting a singular doctrine, and you clearly are not. And I have to admit to taking a little bit of humor at Christians accusing other Christians of not really being Christians. Kind of speaks for itself. They talked a little bit about these silly atheists, how we don't actually believe in the concept, and we can't call God immoral because by nature, God cannot be immoral. We don't understand Scripture because Scripture says God is the most moral being possible. And I think, we're probably, as non-believers, guilty of using some poor language or not being very clear when we talk about God. So let me try to do that a little bit here. Yes, we don't believe in God. So when someone like myself says God is immoral, what I'm really saying is the concept that you're putting forth to me is immoral. I'm not making a personal attack against a God that I believe actually exists. I'm talking about the concept. So for instance, when I look at something like slavery and I come to the conclusion myself that the ownership of another human being is completely immoral, and then I see this concept, God, laying down the rules in which you can own another human being as your property and pass it on to your children as an inheritance, I say, well, this is an immoral act. So you've got this being that's declared to be the most moral being possible, committing an immoral act. This is internally contradictory. This concept does not meet the standards for me to believe in it. And this is to say nothing, of course, of the creation of evil itself. Both implicitly and explicitly, by declaration in Scripture, God is the creator of evil. Of course, he has to be. He's the creator of everything. And it's highly contradictory to say this being, an entity creates evil, but then can't bear it, can't coexist with it, will not put up with it. There's an easy way to deal with that. You don't create it in the first place. And to create a bunch of sentient beings and say, I created evil, I created you evil, but don't be evil. Whatever you do, don't be evil. Of course, you have no choice because you're created with a sinful nature, so you're going to be evil. And the only way to avoid the punishment for that, arbitrary punishment for something that you had nothing to do with, is to just believe that this internally contradictory entity actually exists in the first place. You can actually continue to be evil to some degree, as long as you believe. I can't think of anything more evil than creating evil. You want to talk to me about morality? I say it's immoral to create evil. And before any Christians or presuppositionalists challenge me on what basis do I judge something as evil, it's pretty simple. When I say it's immoral to create evil, they're synonymous, right? I'm saying it's evil to create evil. It's not rocket surgery. And so, once again, keep in mind, this is all conceptual. So, yes, I admit, when I say God is immoral, in some manner, I'm misspeaking. And I understand this gives some Christians a lot of traction to say, geez, if you don't believe in God, why do you talk about him in such a manner? Gman made a video talking about the hypocrisy of atheist morality, in which he made a whole bunch of rash generalizations and misrepresentations of atheists' positions, and then complained about a video, I think it was on Eve's channel, that said that he and Vecca were wannabe slave masters, and complained about that misrepresentation, that it didn't actually represent his true desire, that he had no desire to be a slave owner. Well, Gman, here's the thing about, sort of maintaining high ground. If you're going to complain that someone is misrepresenting you, the thing to make sure that you don't do is misrepresent other people, especially not in the same video. Doesn't work really well. You want to say atheists this and atheists that. At one point, he read some comments on one of his videos where someone had used the N-word, and he said, "That's it. I'm going to use that from this day forward as the poster child for atheism." Well, congratulations. You've just destroyed your own point, right? I mean, would that be acceptable if I found the most disgusting thing ever uttered by a Christian and then applied that to you and all Christians? This is now the poster boy for Christianity. Taking the high road means sometimes you got to endure crap. But tit for tat doesn't maintain the high road. You've got to maintain the high road and say, I'm not going to stoop to that level. And similarly, on Gman's video, while I'm on that subject, at one point he talked about how atheists' morality is hypocritical and they have no basis for it. And, it's all hogwash. He doesn't make any arguments. He just makes statements. But then he says atheists are the most dishonest group in America. Well, now, if you're going to talk about dishonesty, it's kind of important that you be honest. Because the poll you're referring to is the least trusted group in America poll, not the most dishonest. I don't know how you would do the test to find out what the most dishonest group is. That would have to be a very, very far-reaching and elaborate test to try and figure out what group, philosophically, is the most dishonest. It was the least trusted group. And I would argue that the reason a lot of Americans selected atheists as the least trusted group has a lot to do with cultural biases and misunderstandings completely, because a lot of people, especially a lot of sort of armchair Christians, have it in their mind that an atheist is a Satan worshiper. Well, they're probably not going to trust a Satan worshiper. Now, are they? And that's, of course, not what atheism is. By definition, we don't believe in Satan. It doesn't follow that we could be Satan worshipers. So again, if you're going to make a point about dishonesty, it's very important that you're being honest when you're doing that. Now, before I get back to the Veckel discussion, because there's an important point I want to make there, I did want to reference one more thing that Gman said in his video. Now, I realize that this is all low-hanging fruit stuff, but I think it's important to talk about because this is a common thread throughout the YouTube Christian community, so I think it is important to talk about these things. And what Gman said is the same tired argument. You claim you don't believe in God, you say you don't believe in God, but you talk about him so much as atheists. And you don't talk about, why you don't believe in this, that, or the other, made up thing. And he said there's only two reasons that you could do this. The first is that you just have a lot of time on your hands. And the second would be that you have an agenda and you just want to make money. Well, there's probably another reason, Gman, and I can only think of a couple of reasons why you wouldn't talk about it. The other reason might just have something to do with the fact that laws are proposed and enacted based on your theology. This impacts our lives directly sometimes. And we have to sort of put up with it. We have to deal with the prayers before sporting events and all these sorts of things. We have to put up with having the Ten Commandments stare at us in the face if we go to, at least in the U.S., many courthouse buildings. And in the U.S., we have to deal with this whole notion of trying to put creationism into science classes. I assure you, if you keep your religion to yourself and pray in private and in quiet, I don't think you'd see a lot of atheists talking about Christianity so much. And I would say there's only a couple of things that I can think of. Now it's my turn to think of a couple of reasons why you might leave that out. I think one is, because I'm pretty sure in all the hangouts you've been in, you've heard this before. I cannot be the first person to bring this up. So you either just were not listening, you did the finger in the ear bit, which I can see because you tend to overtalk people, and I've watched your body language. Generally, when someone's talking, you're already formulating your next point, and but. Or you have, a cognitive dissonance and this is something inconvenient to you. You don't really want to hear it, so your brain just blocks it out. Or you're being willfully dishonest. And I can't rule that out either because you've already been that in other parts of your video, quite clearly. Now, one more thing, getting back to Veckel's Hangout. I mentioned in the title of this video, the silly atheists. And I think it's really interesting to listen to a particular quote by Matt Bell towards the end of the Hangout. Let's bend our ear for a moment.
The mistake that, well, in my view, atheists are silly. This is why they're silly when you bring up this slavery argument. Jesus, the God of the New Testament, is going to do something far more horrific than anything the God of the Old Testament has ever done. He's going to condemn millions and millions and millions of human beings to eternal hell.
Right, right.
Compared to that, slavery is small-scale stuff.
So isn't that interesting? There's obviously a bit of straw manning going on there, that atheists are totally okay with the New Testament. It's the Old Testament we find so reprehensible. And why don't we ever talk about the New Testament? Us silly atheists, pay no mind to the judgments to come. Well, no, that's not exactly the case. Now, obviously, when it comes to slavery, this is something that we know took place. We know that this actually happened, and we can judge that as immoral. And I find it cute, too. In Gman's hangout, his solo hangout, he talked about atheists don't talk about all the people involved in the slavery and judge them as immoral. It's so convenient that we don't do that we only judge God. Well, I mean, does someone really have to even spell this out for you? But God is judged to be the most moral being. We're judging all those people automatically when we say that the slavery was immoral. We're saying those people were committing immoral acts. We know that now. They probably didn't know that then. That's what the progression of humanity is all about. But getting back to Matt Bell's point, we're so silly. I'll remind everyone of a recent video request made by Matthew Steele where he asked people to come up with the worst moral act possible. And for many of us, whether it was intentional or not, mine actually wasn't. It was kind of semi-accidental. Others were far more intentional. What we came up with was the hell scenario. Yes, by orders of magnitude. What's to come is far worse than slavery. Thank you for making my point for me. This concept that you call God, that you believe is real, is completely and utterly immoral. And therefore the concept fails to meet even the most basic scrutiny by myself based on the morality that I hold dear. And so I don't believe in it. It's just as simple as that. What will not have been lost among many of you is Gman's chuckling and the laughter of Veckel towards the end of this horrific, horrific point. And my question for any Christians out there is, why is it that people such as Raw 5069 and clearly in this hangout, Gman and Veckel take such pleasure in the notion of others suffering for eternity in fire? Why is that so giggly schoolgirl humorous to you? Why do you take such pleasure in telling people that they're going to hell? You don't just say it as some kind of a warning. There's a sick, twisted pleasure in the notion. And it's funny because getting back to the video request made by Matthew Steele recently, in my scenario of the worst moral act possible, I painted the scenario and then I said it could only be made probably somewhat more immoral or evil if the entity committing all of this was doing it simply out of some sick, twisted pleasure. And that's what I see exhibited here. I would be more than happy to be corrected as to what all those giggles and laughter are about when you're talking about the most suffering imaginable. But I kind of think instead of answering that question, I think maybe you should look in a mirror. Thanks everyone for watching.